You know how sometimes life takes the most unexpected turns when you're least prepared for them? Well, that's exactly what happened to me one evening, and even now when I think back on it, I still shake my head in disbelief. I was in the bedroom when my husband's friend knocked on the door, and you won't believe what happened after that. Before I tell you the whole story, let me pause for a moment. I'd really love to know, where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a small town or maybe a big city like Dallas, Chicago, or Los Angeles? Let me know down in the comments, because I've always been fascinated by the stories hidden in every corner of America. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a little like. It helps me keep sharing moments of my life, the ones I thought I'd never speak out loud. All right, now let's step back into that evening with me. It was a quiet Tuesday night, the kind of evening where the air feels heavy and still. The cicadas outside the window had just started their droning chorus, and the last streaks of sunlight were sinking behind the trees. I'd been reading in bed, a novel I'd picked up weeks ago, but hadn't managed to finish. The house was calm, almost too calm. My husband had gone to run an errand, something about needing to pick up a tool from the hardware store, and I didn't think much of it when he said he might be gone for a while. I had just settled deeper into the pillows when I heard it. A knock. Firm, steady, and close. It wasn't the front door. No, this was closer, just outside the bedroom. My heart gave a little jump because I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment I sat there, holding my book against my chest, waiting to hear if maybe I'd imagined it. But then it came again, softer this time, more deliberate. I slipped out of bed and padded across the room, my bare feet against the cool wooden floor. When I opened the door, there he was, my husband's friend, Mark. Now you have to understand something about Mark. He's been part of our lives for years. He and my husband go back decades, sharing stories from their younger days that I've heard so many times I could recite them myself. He's the kind of man who always brings laughter into a room, but there's also this quiet steadiness about him. You feel like he notices things other people don't. At that moment, standing in the doorway with a sheepish smile, and his hand still hovering like he wasn't sure if he should have knocked, he seemed different. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice low, carrying that mix of hesitation and warmth that made me tilt my head. I thought maybe Jim was here. I told him my husband had just stepped out and would probably be gone a while. For a beat, we stood there in silence. I could see the way his eyes flickered, as if he wasn't sure whether to excuse himself or linger. And then, almost naturally, I stepped aside and invited him in. The room suddenly felt charged, though nothing unusual had happened yet. He sat down on the edge of the chair near the window, his hands clasped together like he was holding something fragile between them. I sat back on the bed, book still in hand, though I couldn't focus on it anymore. We started talking, about little things at first. How his week had been, the weather, a funny story he'd heard. But beneath it, there was a current I couldn't ignore. His eyes held mine a moment longer than usual. His laugh felt softer, like it was meant only for me. And when he leaned back, the fading light caught the lines of his face in a way that made me notice details I hadn't really studied before. It's strange how someone so familiar can suddenly feel unfamiliar, like you're seeing them with new eyes. And the truth is, I felt something stir inside me, a mix of curiosity, vulnerability, and a warmth I hadn't expected. I kept reminding myself, this is my husband's friend, a man I've shared dinners and holidays with. But in that moment, it felt as though the walls around the roles we play in life had quietly shifted. I found myself telling him things I don't usually say. Little confessions about how quiet the house can feel when Jim is gone, or how sometimes I miss the days when conversations ran long into the night instead of being swallowed up by television or exhaustion. Mark listened, really listened, nodding in that way of his that makes you feel understood without judgment. He shared, too, about feeling lonely in ways he didn't always admit, about noticing how quickly time passes when you're not paying attention. His words lingered between us, heavy and tender. There was no rush, no need to fill every pause. The silence we shared felt as intimate as the words themselves. I don't know how much time passed like that. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. The cicadas outside grew louder. The sky darkened completely. And still we sat there, two people in a room meant for one, bound by something neither of us had planned. I remember the way the lamplight painted a golden glow across the walls, the way his gaze softened when I laughed, and the quiet awareness that something inside me was unfolding. When I finally walked him to the door, our hands brushed, just for a second, light as air, but enough to send a shiver through me. We didn't speak about it, not directly. He offered me a smile, one of those half smiles that says more than words ever could, and then he stepped out into the night. I stood there long after he'd gone, my hand resting against the doorframe, heart beating faster than it had in years. Nothing had happened, not in the way people might assume. But something had shifted inside me, something I couldn't quite name yet. And that's where I'll leave you for now. Because what unfolded after that night was not only unexpected, but changed the way I see myself, my marriage, and the quiet corners of intimacy we sometimes overlook. The next morning, I woke up with the memory of Mark's visit, still lingering like a half-remembered dream. You know how sometimes you wake and can't quite tell if something really happened or if it was your imagination playing tricks on you? That's how it felt. Except it had happened. I'd seen him, spoken with him, felt that strange electricity when his hand brushed mine. The house was bathed in the pale light of dawn. My husband was already downstairs. I could hear the low hum of the coffee maker and the clatter of dishes as he poured cereal into a bowl. I slipped into my robe and joined him, moving through the familiar rhythm of our morning routine. Everything looked the same. The same mug he always uses, the same news channel on in the background, the same conversation about errands and bills. And yet, inside me, something had shifted. I found myself glancing at my phone more than usual that day, almost expecting a message from Mark, though he had no reason to reach out. Every time my phone buzzed with a random notification, my heart skipped, only to sink when it wasn't him. I felt like a schoolgirl again, waiting for something I couldn't even name. That afternoon, while folding laundry in the bedroom, I caught myself staring at the chair where he had sat the night before. The memory of his presence felt so vivid I could almost imagine him still there, leaning forward with his hands clasped, eyes steady on mine. I shook my head, almost laughing at myself. At 55, I thought I had passed the stage of being so easily unsettled by someone's presence. 2 days passed before I saw him again. My husband had invited him over to help with a small repair project in the garage. When Mark walked in, carrying that easy smile, it was as if the air changed. I felt it instantly. He greeted me politely, nothing unusual, but our eyes met for a fraction longer than they needed to. That was enough. I busied myself in the kitchen while they worked, but I couldn't ignore the sound of their laughter drifting in from the garage. I told myself not to be ridiculous, not to overthink, but when I finally stepped outside to bring them glasses of iced tea, I caught the smallest flicker of something in his eyes when he looked at me. It wasn't bold, not obvious. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it was there. Recognition. Connection. Later, when my husband went inside to take a phone call, Mark lingered by the workbench, wiping his hands with a rag. I stood near the doorway, unsure whether to retreat or stay. He looked at me, his expression softer than usual. "About the other night," he said quietly, almost like he was testing the words. My breath caught. I hadn't expected him to bring it up. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," he continued, his voice careful. "I didn't mean to. I don't know. I just felt like we understood each other in that moment." I stepped closer, my hands wrapped around the glass I still held. "You didn't overstep," I whispered, surprising myself with how certain I felt. It meant something to me, too." He exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath. The silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. Then my husband's voice echoed from inside, calling for him. And just like that, the spell broke. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, I couldn't sleep. His steady breathing filled the dark room while my mind replayed every detail. The way Mark's eyes had searched mine, the relief in his voice when I admitted I had felt it too. I stared at the ceiling, feeling torn between loyalty and longing, between the life I had built, and the sudden, stirring awareness that maybe there was still more to discover about myself. Over the next week, I noticed how often I thought about him. The smallest things reminded me. A certain song on the radio, the way sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, the silence in the house when my husband wasn't home. These moments made me ache, though I wasn't sure if it was with guilt or with something closer to awakening. One afternoon, when I was out in the garden trimming back the roses, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I turned to see Mark standing there, holding a small bag of tools. He smiled, that half smile again. "Jim asked me to drop these off," he said. I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded. "He's not home right now." "I know," he replied, his voice low. "I thought maybe I'd catch you instead." There it was, clearer this time, not just an accident of circumstance. My heart raced as we stood among the roses, their fragrance sweet and heavy in the warm air. I wanted to ask him what he meant, why he came, what exactly he was looking for. But instead, I found myself simply standing there, waiting, letting the moment unfold without pushing it forward. He didn't step closer, not then. But the look in his eyes told me everything, that whatever this was, it wasn't just in my imagination. It was real, and it was growing, quietly, like the roses blooming around us. When he finally turned to go, he paused, his voice almost a whisper. "I'll see you soon." And just like that, he left me standing in the garden, my hands trembling, my breath shallow, and my heart full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. That night, I sat alone by the window, looking out at the stars scattered across the dark sky. I thought about the years behind me, the choices I had made, and the woman I had become. And then I thought about the possibility of something new, something that felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It scared me, but it also drew me in, like the pull of the tide, steady, inevitable, impossible to resist. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Outwardly, everything in my life was the same. My husband's steady presence, the routines of cooking, errands, and keeping the house in order. Yet beneath it all, there was a constant hum, an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. It was as if my world had quietly shifted on its axis, and I was the only one who knew. I began noticing things I'd never paid much attention to before. The way the afternoon light slanted across the living room floor, how the silence in the house seemed heavier when I was alone, how my own reflection in the mirror looked softer, almost expectant. I was aware of myself in a way I hadn't been in years, as though my skin remembered what it meant to feel alive. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened again. My husband had gone out to run errands, and I was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for dinner when I heard a knock at the back door. My heart leaped before I even turned, as though some part of me already knew. And sure enough, when I opened the door, there was Mark. He held no tools this time, no excuse in his hands, just that familiar half smile. "I was driving by," he said, almost casually. "Thought I'd stop in." I let him in, trying to steady my breath. We sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence at first. I could feel the tension, not heavy like a burden, but delicate, like the space between notes in a song. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about the other night," he admitted. His eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. "Neither had I." The words rose to my lips before I could swallow them. "Me either," I said softly. Something shifted in the room then, subtle but undeniable. He reached out, not boldly, but with the gentleness of someone testing whether the moment could hold the weight of his touch. His fingers brushed against mine on the table, light as a whisper. I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my hand so our palms met, warm and steady. We sat like that, connected in the simplest way, yet it felt profound. No words were needed. In that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary, cutting boards, a bowl of onions, the faint ticking of the clock, I felt extraordinary, seen, wanted, alive. But with the closeness came a rush of conflicting emotions. Guilt pricked at me, reminding me of vows made and years shared with my husband. At the same time, there was a deeper truth stirring inside me, one that told me this moment wasn't about betrayal, but about discovery, about finding a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. We talked for a long while, though I couldn't tell you half of what was said. The words mattered less than the feeling, the shared laughter, the pauses where our eyes did the speaking, the way his presence filled the quiet spaces I had grown used to. When he finally rose to leave, I walked him to the door. This time, he didn't hesitate. His hand lingered on mine as he said goodbye, and for the briefest second, I thought he might lean closer. But he didn't. He simply gave me that look, tender, searching, full of something unspoken, and then he was gone. That night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in my bedroom, studying my reflection. The woman looking back at me was the same gray threading through her hair, same lines around her eyes, but she felt different. Lighter, as if she'd rediscovered something she thought had been lost forever. I lay awake long after my husband had drifted into sleep, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. My mind replayed every detail of the afternoon, the warmth of Mark's hand, the way his gaze seemed to touch me more deeply than any word could. I didn't know where this path would lead, and that uncertainty both frightened and thrilled me. Over the weekend, I carried the secret inside me like a spark, hidden but glowing. Every glance at my husband stirred the tension within me, love and loyalty on one side, longing and curiosity on the other. I wasn't blind to the risks. But I also wasn't blind to the truth that something in me had been awakened, something I couldn't just tuck away and forget. The following week, he came by again. Not with an excuse, not by chance, but with intention. We sat on the porch this time, the evening air warm and still around us. He spoke of his life, his regrets, his hopes, the loneliness he carried, and I listened, my heart aching with recognition. It felt as though our souls had found each other in the quiet spaces where no one else could see. At one point, as the crickets began their chorus, he reached for my hand again. And this time, instead of just holding it, he lifted it gently, pressing it to his chest, right over his heart. I could feel it beating, strong and steady beneath my palm. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. That simple gesture said everything, that I wasn't alone in what I felt, that he, too, was caught in this web of tenderness and longing. I knew then that whatever was happening between us wasn't going to simply fade away. It had roots now, deepening quietly, entwining itself with my days and nights. When I finally went back inside, I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against the door, my chest rising and falling with the weight of everything unspoken. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this much. Life had opened a door I hadn't even realized was there, and I had stepped through it. The days that followed carried a quiet intensity, as if every moment was suspended between what was and what might be. Mark and I never crossed the line into something reckless, but we both knew the bond between us had deepened into a place neither of us could easily step back from. It wasn't just glances anymore, or the brief brush of hands. It was something fuller, something that filled the silence inside me. But with that fullness came the weight of reality. At night, lying beside my husband, I felt torn in two. I'd loved him. There was no question of that. We had built a life together, decades of memories and comfort and shared laughter. Yet, in the quiet spaces of my heart, I'd also felt this new pulse, this reminder that I was still capable of feeling seen, desired, and alive in ways I hadn't let myself imagine. One evening, as autumn settled in and the air carried that crispness of change, I found myself sitting with Mark on the porch again. The trees around us were just beginning to shift colors, their leaves catching the last of the day's light. We didn't speak at first. We just sat, listening to the sound of the world winding down. Finally, I turned to him. "Mark," I said softly, "we can't keep living in this in-between place. It's not fair to anyone." His eyes held mine, steady and full of understanding. "I know," he said. "I've thought the same thing. But I also can't deny what's between us." Neither could I, but I knew the truth. Sometimes love doesn't come to us in the neat, expected way. Sometimes it arrives late in life, surprising and complicated, teaching us things we didn't know we still needed to learn. "I don't want to lose what we found," I whispered, "but I can't destroy what I already have." He nodded, his expression tender, touched with sadness. "Then maybe what we have isn't meant to be lived in the way we might wish. Maybe it's meant to remind us of who we are, of what's still alive inside us." His words settled into me like a truth I hadn't been able to put into words myself. This connection, as powerful as it was, didn't have to lead to ruin. It could remain what it already was, an awakening, a reminder, a gift that asked nothing more than to be honored quietly. We sat there until the stars emerged, letting the night close around us. And when he finally stood to leave, he pressed my hand gently, his touch lingering, as though he wanted to give me strength to carry what we both now knew. That night, I lay awake again, but this time there was no turmoil. Instead, there was clarity. I realized that love wears many faces. The steady love of a husband who has shared my life for so many years, the unexpected tenderness of a friend who saw me when I didn't even realize I needed to be seen, and the deeper love for myself, for the woman who still longed to feel, to connect, to grow. In the days and weeks that followed, Mark and I sought each other less, not because the connection had disappeared, but because we had acknowledged its place. It lived in the quiet spaces now, in the glance across a room, in the unspoken gratitude between us. And that was enough. My marriage didn't collapse under the weight of what happened. If anything, I found myself more attentive, more present. I started talking with my husband again, really talking, the way we used to. I laughed more, shared more, and he noticed. He didn't ask why. I don't think he needed to. What mattered was that something inside me had shifted, and it spilled over into the life we had built together. I'll never forget those moments with Mark. They weren't a betrayal, though to others they might look that way. To me, they were a mirror, showing me the woman I still was beneath the routines and years. A woman who could still feel desire, who could still be moved, who could still surprise herself. Sometimes life brings us these unexpected encounters not to change the path we're on, but to remind us why we chose it in the first place. To wake us up, to stir us into remembering that we are alive, even now, even at 55, even when the world might try to convince us otherwise. And so, when I look back on that evening, the knock on the bedroom door, the way everything began, I don't see it as a story of temptation or regret. I see it as the story of a woman who rediscovered herself through an unlikely connection, and who chose to carry that discovery forward, quietly, tenderly, into the rest of her life. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't the ones that are acted out, but the ones that awaken something inside us we thought was lost. And that's a story I'll carry with me always.